Dear friends, good morning on Wednesday the 13th of January. Just before Jesus washes his disciples' feet at the Last Supper, John comments, "Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." And later on in that chapter, Jesus says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another." When we become Christians, we receive the love of Christ, but we also receive a command. Jesus calls us to love each other as he has loved us, to the end, without limit, without turning away, without forsaking one another, without getting fed up or tired, without pulling away from each other and starting a new church when we disagree. He calls us to love each other even when we don't like each other very much, to turn away from our unworthy, irritable, petty and childish thoughts about one another, and to love one another to the end. John Calvin, the 16th century French theologian and pastor, defined the church like this: "Wherever we see God's word purely preached and heard, and the sacraments, that is baptism and the Lord's Supper, administered according to God's institution." Now, I've known and loved that definition for a long time, but this week I listened to somebody speaking on how important it is that God's word is heard as well as preached. It's easy to think that as long as God's word is being preached, then the church is healthy. But it's quite possible to preach God's word and to assent to all the right doctrines. But if they're not heard and received into the life of the church, then the church may not be healthy. And one of the main impediments to the gospel being heard is the relationships and the culture within the church. Are the members of the church seeking to love each other as Christ has loved us, to the end? People pick this up very quickly from the tone, the atmosphere, the culture, the social environment, and in particular, how we disagree graciously. All this makes a profound difference as to whether people hear the gospel or not. I think it was Francis Schaeffer who said that the church is the plausibility structure for the gospel. In other words, if people don't see the gospel being lived out in relationships, then they won't be able to hear the gospel from our lips. If our town, if our nation saw grace, mercy, love, and the absence of judgmentalism and joyful acceptance of one another in our churches, then the gospel will explode. Just one notice to flag up today. On Thursday evening, the Love Cheltenham Alpha course begins with 27 guests at the last count. The details of the course are on the daily update, but it would be so good to have a group of people who committed to praying from 8 o'clock for about half an hour or so while the course is happening. If you'd like to do that, perhaps you'd like to let the church office know and we'll put you in touch with each other. God bless you today.